back on the record, People versus Luann Simon, 182261. Ms. Bradbury Russell is still on the stand. You remain under oath. And Mr. Silver.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Russell. We've already established you were interviewed 3 different times by the Michigan State Police. Is that correct? Or the AG's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever, during any of those interviews, tell Detective Arndt or anyone else present at those interviews from the Michigan State Police or the J8 or the Attorney General's office that you discussed your May 14, 2014 folder with Luann Simon?
No.
I want to try to bring some clarity to this issue of your agenda with your handwritten notes. And if I may approach, Your Honor, I'd like to hand the witness Exhibit 11. You have Exhibit 11 in front of you, Ms. Russell?
Yes.
And these are the notes that you made during your discussion with President Simon, whether it was in person or by telephone. Is that correct?
I believe yes.
And the reason you think this discussion took place by telephone is because your agenda expressly states at the top that you prepared by phone and to call Marty Howe at this particular number. Is that correct?
That's what it says at the top, yes.
And if we look at your handwritten notes, by my count, Ms. Russell, there are 8 specific names that you identify in this agenda. For example, next to item 3, your handwritten notes say Bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
And under number 7, the name Mark Hollis appears. Is that correct?
Yes.
And underneath that, Andy appears, correct?
Yes.
And then if we go down to her items, the first one, it looks like Diane. Is that right?
Yes.
And then underneath that, I see the name Jennifer Wallace, correct?
Yes.
And then at the very bottom, it says Kemmel. That's somebody else at Michigan State. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then over to the right, it says Lee and June, correct?
Yes.
So there's 8 specific names that you wrote down during your discussion with President Simon on this agenda, correct?
I think there's one that you didn't mention that's on here also.
Okay, thank you. Which one would that be?
Irvin.
Where is that?
It's under item 7.
Oh, you're right. Irvin Magic Johnson under number 7, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we then have 9 different specific names you wrote down on your agenda during your meeting with President Simon on or about May 19, 2014. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, the name Nasser does not appear anywhere on these handwritten notes, correct?
Correct.
Likewise, Estelle McGee does not appear anywhere on these notes, correct?
Correct.
And Estelle McGee stands for Estelle McGroarty, is that correct?
Yes.
And her name is not anywhere on here, correct?
Correct.
Likewise, age discrimination, which you wrote on your folder under Estelle McGroarty, does not appear anywhere on these notes, correct?
Correct.
And so it is very possible, perhaps even likely, that during your discussion with President Simon on May 19th, you did not specifically discuss Nasser or Estelle McGroarty. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. We talked about exhibits A, B, and C last time, and it was a week ago. So exhibits A and B, at least, which I'm happy to show you. In fact, I probably should show you. So if I may approach again, Your Honor. Thank you. after looking at Exhibits A and B, Ms. Russell, it does appear that you participated in a meeting with President Simon as well as 6, 7, 8 other individuals on May 14, 2014, correct?
Yes.
And the purpose of that meeting was to discuss the response to the McCaskill survey. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's why you made the folder dated May 14th, is in connection with the meeting you had with the team to discuss responding to the McCaskill survey, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And Exhibit C, Ms. Russell, shows that your one-on-one meetings with President Simon, including the one that was scheduled for May 19th, was scheduled long in advance. In fact, back in October of 2013 is when those one-on-one meetings were scheduled. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you did receive Exhibits A, B, and C. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to move for the admission of Exhibits A, B, and C, please.
Any objection?
Your Honor, just a brief thought here. Ms. Russell, do you recall, do you have an independent recollection of receiving those emails?
I was going to correct myself on this, if I could.
Sure.
Because they're directed to my assistant. One is Exhibit C. So, and when I said yes, I think I was, and I've got to clarify this, I was responding to having received these from you. So I have to apologize.
Okay, so then let's go back. Do you have an independent recollection of having either received or reviewed either A, B, or C?
No, I don't have independent recollection of that.
Then there's not sufficient foundation. We don't object in terms of the record keeper function. This comes from the exhibit, so we can produce to the defense. And in terms of this witness, she can't do the knowledge of the statements within those emails can't be attributed to her because she doesn't have any recall of them.
Well, Ms. Russell, do you have any reason to doubt that either you or your assistant did not receive those emails?
No.
And again, Your Honor, these were produced by Mr. Teeter's office to us. So in light of the fact that the witness has testified that she doesn't have an independent recollection of receiving them today, it's obvious they were sent to her. We received them from the AG, and she has no reason to believe she didn't get them. So I believe an adequate foundation has been laid for their admissibility.
Okay, well, I don't agree. If she doesn't remember getting them except as part of discovery related to this case, then I'm not going to admit them through her.
Okay. During your interviews with the Michigan State Police, in the sworn statement you gave to the Attorney General, you specifically advised them that you do not recall what was discussed at the meeting on May 19th with President Simon. Is that correct?
Objection. Just because we switched attorneys doesn't mean we go back and re-ask the same question. I think that's maybe number 7 or 8. I've lost count how many times we've asked that exact same question. So it's been asked and answered.
Okay, I believe so.
Well, except there's a new wrinkle, Your Honor. And that new wrinkle is 801D4. Rule 801D4 says that if the prosecution has tried to impeach this witness with what she said at her prior statements, then we can introduce those transcripts under 801D4, which is not hearsay.
I don't have a D4.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Maybe I can shed some light on this. It's very close. 801D1, that's exactly why this rule exists. Mr. Teeter called this witness an adverse witness last time, if the court will recall. Mr. Teeter represented to the court that it looks like this witness is telling the court something different live than what she told the investigators during her interviews. That's exactly why this rule exists. 801D1B. This is evidence of a declarant's prior consistent statement offered to combat an accusation of a fabrication. That is exactly what happened last week, and we are seeking to offer the prior consistent statements that the court needs to consider in order to analyze Mr. Teeter's contention on credibility.
Okay. I'm going to allow it then under 801D.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Russell, during your interview, you told the people present during those interviews or your sworn statement repeatedly that you did not recall what you discussed with President Simon on May 19, correct?
Yes.
And you told them repeatedly that you had no recollection at all of ever specifically discussing Larry Nassar with President Simon during your meeting on May 19. Is that correct?
Yes. The name Larry Nassar is, they were asking, I believe, regarding whether or not I talked to her about Larry Nassar. Am I understanding your question
correctly? Yes, right. And you said you had no recollection of discussing Larry Nassar with President Simon during your meeting on May 19.
I don't have any independent recollection of talking specifically about Larry Nassar.
And if I may approach again, Your Honor, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Russell, I have handed you what I have marked as Exhibit D, which is a copy of your recorded interview that you gave on June 26, 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I've also handed you Exhibit E, which is a copy of the transcript of your sworn statement that you gave on July 26, 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Detectives Arndt and Kavanaugh were present for both of these interviews or sworn statements. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the one that was taken on July 26, which we've marked as Exhibit E, was conducted by Attorney Bill Ralston of the Attorney General's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
And nowhere in these transcripts does it reflect that you were ever advised that they were conducting a criminal investigation. Is that correct?
I don't remember being advised that. There are 57 entries on here, pages.
Right. And I don't want you to go through and read all 57 pages. And perhaps the easiest way to do this is I am going to move at this time, Your Honor, for the admission of Exhibits D and E.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
D and E are.
Okay, thank you. One final line of questions, Ms. Russell, and I want to return to your agenda with the handwritten notes, which we've marked as Exhibit 11.
Actually, Your Honor, just for the record, I think it's been admitted as Exhibit
admitted as Exhibit 11. That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Yes.
Next to item number 3, training for court. Do you see that, Ms. Russell?
I do.
There is a handwritten note that appears to have an asterisk, and it says prohibited and SA. Do you see that?
Yes.
That handwritten note with that asterisk pertains to item number 3 on Exhibit 11. Is that correct?
I believe, item 3, you said?
Yes.
Yes, I believe so.
And the asterisk that appears underneath item number 7 that references the name Andy, do you see that?
Yes.
That asterisk and that notation pertains to item number 7. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And so there are no notes on your agenda marked as Exhibit 11 or admitted as Exhibit 11 that pertain to item number 6, COM incident. Isn't that true?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe finish, Your Honor, if I may have 1 second to confer with Mr. Morganroth, please. Okay. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peter, are you going to be questioning her about Exhibits D and E?
D and E?
Right. The ones
Yes.
that were just submitted?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to look at them in some way.
Your Honor, we have copies for Your Honor if you would like them.
That would be great. Thank you.
Ms. Russell, let me show you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 9 and ask you to identify it for the record.
This is an agenda for August 20th, 2014, 9:15 a.m.
And who prepared that agenda?
I believe I would have.
And whose handwritten notes are on that agenda?
They're not mine.
Okay. Ms. Russell, you were asked questions about the May 19th, 2014 meeting, and you had indicated to the best of your recollection you believe that that was a phone meeting. Do you recall that testimony?
I believe, yes, that's what I said because of what's written at the top of the agenda.
Okay. And that number that's written on the top of the agenda, whose number is that?
I don't know. It says call Marty Howe at that number.
Do you know whether or not that's the president's office?
I don't know.
Do you know what that phone number is?
The number that I can recall was 56550, or I believe that was the main number for the president's office, but I don't recognize that number.
And do you know whether that call, if it was in fact a phone meeting, would have been initiated by you or by President Simon?
I can't recall.
Do you know whether or not that would have been on your cell phone or on your office phone?
I'm going to assume from my office or in my office.
Do you know if you were in your office, why your staff would call you on your cell phone? Was that a standard practice?
If I was out of the office, I only had a cell phone, and if they needed to reach me, they could call me on my cell phone.
If you were in your office, was there any practice or procedure that instructed your staff to call you on your cell phone if you were in your own office?
I wouldn't think so. It's not to say that it's impossible, but less likely.
Ms. Russell, let me show you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 42. These are a certified copy of your cell phone records for the number that you gave us. Can you take a look at those?
I've never seen them before, but I see them now, so.
Okay, and that number at the top, is that your cell phone number?
On the top of, yes.
Your Honor, we provided a copy of these to the defense. It includes a certification under 902.11. We'd move the admission of Proposed Exhibit 42.
Any objections?
Your Honor, can I voir dire for a second, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Whatever these records show, do you have any independent recollection as you sit here today, Ms. Russell, of receiving or making any of the calls reflected on these records from 5 years ago?
No.
And do you even recognize or know the numbers or the majority of the numbers that are reflected in these phone records as having been received by you or calls made by you 5 years ago?
No.
Your Honor, in light of the testimony of Ms. Russell, we object to the admissibility of these records. Mr. Teeter was able to successfully convince you that A, B, and C should not be admitted because Ms. Russell had no independent recollection of receiving them. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If she has no independent recollection of making or receiving these calls, then there's no foundation. In addition, Your Honor, these records are completely irrelevant if we don't even know whose numbers are reflected on these records. So we oppose the admissibility of Exhibit 42.
Mr. Teeter?
Your Honor, first of all, they're admissible under 902.11 as a business record. They're certified by Verizon to produce the records on the number already identified by Paulette Granberry Russell. The specific content of those calls is not what we're asking, whether or not those calls took place and existed or what's reflected in these records. So we have a we believe we have provided a sufficient foundation. And then secondly is, once it's admitted, I will be asking her about certain specific numbers, because included on here are a number to her own office, and also numbers to, for example, her daughter's cell phone number. And I believe she will recognize those numbers, but obviously it'd be improper to ask her those until this exhibit's been admitted and it meets the evidentiary foundation under 902.
He's wrong, Your Honor. 902 goes to self-authentication. It has nothing to do with foundation. You struck or didn't admit exhibits A, B, and C because the witness had no personal knowledge of receiving them. Therefore, you held there was not proper foundation. So again, Your Honor, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If Ms. Russell has no independent recollection of receiving or making any calls on there, then there has not been adequate foundation laid for the admissibility of this exhibit.
And admitting it because it is certified, and 902 refers to self-authentication as opposed to the memory of the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Russell, let me show you on your own cell phone records.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting. I apologize, but under 902, a party intending to offer a record into evidence under this paragraph must provide written notice of that intention to all adverse parties and must make the record and declaration available for inspection sufficiently in advance of their offer into evidence to provide an adverse party with a fair opportunity to challenge them. That is the last paragraph of 902, business records.
Mr. Chief?
Your Honor, I have no objection to that. Counsel and I have had this discussion at length. We provided those records upon their receipt to our office, which was yesterday. I provided them hard copies today. Previously, they had indicated that we had reached an agreement with regard to certified records, both from MSU and from other sources. As long as they met with the certification council's withdrawing that, then that's fine. We'll bring this witness back on June 11th. We'll waste the court's time to go back through these same phone records because they've already been admitted, and I'll ask her these questions then. That's fine. But we believe under our previous agreement with the council, whether or not these are actually the records from Verizon is not a question. They're certified records from Verizon. If they want to postpone that part of my questioning until the 11th, that's fine. But we believe that is sufficiently advanced of trial. This is not a trial, it's a prelim. And so the question is whether or not these records, we can ask her questions about the calls that were made to her and from her phone during May 14th, 15th, 16th, and the 19th. So we can do it anyway.
Let me be clear about a couple things, Your Honor. Number one, I am not walking back, reneging, or rescinding on any agreement whatsoever that I've made with Mr. Teeter. I want the record to be very, very clear about that. Number two, Your Honor, I saw these records for the first time last night. I have no interest whatsoever in inconveniencing Ms. Russell. She's already taken 2 days out of her schedule to be here, which we appreciate enormously. I have no interest in having her come back a third day. I simply want to make known for the record that I did not receive these records until yesterday, did not have a chance to even see them until last night, had no ability to look at a hard copy, only to look at them on my phone. And so I simply want to make that clear for the record, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. I'm admitting it out of the interest of saving some time. And because I don't think it's going to be the smoking gun in this case. It's going to have some influence, possibly, depending on what I hear. But I don't think anybody will be disadvantaged by my admitting this now so that we can move along with Mr. Andre Russell's testimony.
Ms. Russell, I want to refer you to May 14th at 8:33 p.m. Can you take a look at that entry?
May 14. at 8:33 p.m.
Did you receive an incoming phone call on that night on May 14th?
Yes,
And you recall that phone call is from what town?
says Lansing.
You recognize that cell phone number as Christine Moore's cell phone number?
No,
Is that her? You don't know whether or not that's her number? Or
I-
you don't recognize it?
I don't recognize the number.
How long was that phone call at 8:33?
68 minutes.
I'm sorry, how many?
It says 68 minutes, if I have this correct. I'm sorry. Yeah, 68.
And then did you receive,
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm going to object to the relevancy of this. We already know from the testimony of Ms. Moore, as well as Ms. Thomashow, that Ms. Moore did not even speak to Ms. Thomashow until the evening of May 15th. So why are we talking about records or calls that predated anything prior to May 15th?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I actually misspoke. I meant 15, excuse me.
Okay.
I'll withdraw that question.
Well, the 68-minute call was May 14th that he asked about.
No, I think he's correcting.
Right, yes, correct that.
So thank you, Mr. Silver, for
Thank
bringing
you,
that to
Your
our
Honor.
attention.
I'm sorry, on May 15th, did you receive an incoming phone call at 8:09?
Yes,
And that number, 517-719-6395, do you recognize that number?
no,
And that was for how long?
16 minutes.
As we sit here today, do you recall what Christine Moore's phone number was at the time that she worked for you?
No,
Okay. May 19th at 9:57, can you take a look at the phone number for the call at that time?
May 19th, 9:57. Yes,
What number is that?
the number, which number are you talking about?
The one at the 9, is it 9:57?
35, yes, that's my, that's a line into my office.
Okay, so that's your office number placing an incoming
That's-
call?
That's the Office for Inclusion's main number.
Okay. And that, you received an incoming phone call?
The
at-
office received an incoming phone call. I guess that's an incoming call. That's what it says here.
To your cell phone?
To my cell phone from my office,
Okay, at 9:57.
7 a.m.
So, as I asked you earlier, it was not a practice for your staff to call you on your cell phone when you were in the office, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you recall what time the meeting was?
Well,
supposed to be?
I'm sorry, I don't, I'm looking at this while I'm trying to answer your question, so ask me the question again, please.
Okay, I actually had asked you that question before you were looking at these. My question was it a common practice for your staff, or did you give them instructions to call you on your cell phone when you were sitting in your own office? That's unrelated to these records. Do you recall that question?
This was a 1-minute call, my cell phone to my office.
No, it's incoming.
Okay.
Incoming means to your cell phone from your office.
Destination to my office. Okay, so,
So let's start again.
yeah,
The 9:57 phone call was to your cell phone, right? 'Cause
to
it's
my
your
cell phone,
record.
yes.
And that was from your office, right?
From my office's Main line,
Okay.
yes.
And that was for 1 minute?
That was for 1 minute,
And that was at 9:57.
9:57.
On that same day, what time were you supposed to meet with President Simon?
Says here 10:15. There was a 8:30 to 10 staff coordinators meeting in Olds Hall. So it was probably my assistant calling to remind me to get back to the office.
And there is, if you can take a look at these, do you show any phone call made from your cell phone during the time of your meeting with President Simon from 10:50 on?
No. But I wasn't in the office.
You were asked on cross-examination whether or not during your interviews you had ever told MSP that you had mentioned Nassar or sent any documents to President Simon with Nassar's name on it, or received any from President Simon with Nassar's name on it. Do you recall that question?
Are you talking about the question this morning?
Yes.
The question was related to the agenda.
And the question was, Nassar's name's not on the agenda, right?
Correct.
When you talked to us originally, though, that in May of 2018, you never mentioned anything about the fact that you had a calendared meeting with President Simon on May 19th, did you?
You might recall I said I answered the questions that were asked of me.
That was a yes or no question. I want you to answer my question. Okay, my question was, did you ever tell MSP on that May 25th interview in 2018 that your calendar showed you had a meeting with President Simon?
No, that was not the questions that were asked.
My question is, did you ever tell them about the folder, the May 14th folder?
On what day?
On the May 25th, 2018 interview.
I was not asked about the May folder.
Here, listen to my question. Did you ever tell MSP about the May 14th folder when you met with them on May 25th?
No.
She's only answers the question she's asked. And she's said it 3 times.
She needs to answer this question.
No, I did not.
Did you ever tell MSP at that May 25th meeting about the email that you sent to President Simon on May 16th of 2014?
No, I did not.
You were asked a question about the settlement of the OCR complaints, and those complaints, I believe, based on your recollection, were the ones that were filed in 2011 and 2012. Do you remember those questions by Mr. Morganroth?
The resolution agreement involved those complaints, but the resolution agreement may have gone into other areas as well.
Okay. And my question was, though, that settlement was entered in September of 2015. Is that correct?
Yes.
So during the entire time period that the investigation of Larry Nassar went on, that OCR investigation was still pending, wasn't it? During the summer of 2014?
The OCR investigation, at least the questions and things, 2014, I know they visited the campus in February, but is your question whether the investigation itself was continuing?
Well, let me see if I can clarify. The resolution wasn't reached until September 2015, correct?
I believe so.
So everything with OCR was still pending all through 2014, wasn't it?
I believe so.
So any possible sanctions that OCR could have imposed on MSU were still alive and well and pending during 2014, weren't they?
I believe so.
Okay. And is that why when I asked you about the items that, why you would have notified President Simon right away in 2014 about the Thomas Show complaint was because your office was on heightened alert because of the pending OCR investigation?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading question.
You bet. Your Honor, this witness has already taken positions that are adverse to ours. We have the right to use leading questions.
Now, hold on a second, Your Honor. Just because she has given testimony that is not favorable to his case does not mean that she qualifies as an adverse witness.
Well, I think in this area, she is potentially, and so I'm going to allow answer.
Thank you. Do you recall my question?
No, please.
So all of the sanctions that OCR could have imposed were still hanging over MSU during all of 2014 and into 2015 until that resolution was actually reached, weren't they?
With respect to any complaints that were out there?
Well, the 2011 and 2012 complaints you already indicated were still pending all the way up until that resolution in 2015, correct? Right back at the questions with regard to OCR, the possible sanctions, and the fact that when those were resolved. My questions are follow-ups to those.
I'm going to allow it. I do remember some reference to heightened scrutiny.
Okay. So do you recall my question?
No.
I'm going to try it again? All right. You were asked the question about why you took this complaint to President Simon so quickly. Do you recall me asking you that question?
Yes.
And you told me that at that time it was because of the OCR pending investigation that there was a heightened state of alert in the Title IX office during that summer of 2014. Do you recall that testimony?
I believe I did say something along those lines.
Okay, and is that still true?
Yes.
And that would have existed all the way up until the resolution was reached in 2015 with OCR resolving those complaints?
Yes, but I also said it was because it involved a doctor and a patient.
Right. No, right. There was that additional factor. Right. I didn't mean to cut that off.
Because it involved a doctor and a patient.
Right. So we have two reasons to bring it to her right away, right? The OCR investigation and sort of that heightened alert, and the fact that we have a doctor on a patient complaint, and that's a big deal, right?
Yes.
Okay. You were asked a question about whether or not you were told that by Detectives Arndt and Kavanaugh that this was a criminal investigation. Do you recall that question?
Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Yes. You were asked the question by Mr. Morgenroth about whether or not you were told by Detectives Arndt and Kavanaugh that this was a criminal investigation. Do you remember that question?
I remember the question.
Okay. Let me go back, because when you were approached by Detective Kavanaugh and Detective Arndt, did they inform you that they were from the Michigan State Police?
Yes.
Okay, and did they tell you that they were working with the Attorney General on the Nassar criminal investigation?
I can't independently recall exactly what they said, no.
Not specific wording, but did they tell you something along that line of why they were talking to you and the fact that they were involved in an investigation assisting our office?
I was aware that the AG had been asked to look into the matter involving MSU and Nasser.
Do you recall specifically the conversation between you and Detective Arnton Kavanaugh?
No, I don't.
You were asked the question about whether or not President Simon was involved in any aspect of the 2014 investigation of Nasser. Do you recall that question? And I believe your answer was, I didn't ask President Simon to be involved in the investigation. Do you recall that question and answer?
When was the question?
It would have been, I'm sorry, Mr. Morgenroth asked you that question this morning.
I'm recalling a question, yes.
Okay, but just so that we're clear, I'm not asking you about involvement, okay? I'm asking you about notification. On May 16th and again on May 19th, you notified President Simon of this complaint, didn't you?
I notified.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered. She's already testified. She has absolutely no recollection of discussing Nasser with President Simon on May 19th. She said that about half a dozen or a dozen times.
Okay. Is this any different than her expressions before?
Well, Your Honor, I was following up on the question by Mr. Morgenroth about involvement in the investigation. That was really my question. I can, if you want, I can rephrase it.
Okay, rephrase it so it's not the same thing.
Okay, you were asked about whether or not President Simon was involved in any aspect of the 2014 investigation. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
Okay. Involvement, I want to separate. Is there a difference in your mind between notification and involvement?
Yes.
Okay. And is it your testimony that on May 16th you did notify President Simon through email?
Of an incident involving a sports med doctor.
Right. And then on May 19th, you put it on the agenda for COM incident, which was College of Osteopathic Medicine. Is that right?
COM incident is on the agenda.
Okay. You were asked about the notes on the outside of the 2014 folder. Remember those questions from Mr. Morgenroth?
Yes.
And you were asked when they were made, why they were made. Do you recall those questions?
I recall being asked some questions this morning.
You were also asked those questions the other day, though, and I want to clarify because I think your answers to Mr. Morgenroth have been slightly different. Can you look at this is a transcript from this hearing when you testified last week on page 149 when I asked you those questions, starting at line 12. Can you read the next several lines and see if that refreshes your recollection?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Whatever the testimony is on the record, it is the testimony on the record. It is completely improper for Mr. Teeter to show this witness transcript of her own testimony that's already on this record and ask her if that's what she said. The record speaks for itself.
Well, if there's some lack of clarity, and if she may need to explain what she said before, what she's saying today, I want us to come out of this with clear answers, so I'm going to allow it.
Okay, but he first has to establish, Your Honor, if he's offering it to refresh her recollection, that she doesn't recall something which he hasn't established. So that's a predicate to showing a prior statement to a witness to refresh the witness's recollection. So the predicate for refreshing her recollection has not even been met yet.
Your Honor, I'm going to refer back to Mr. Morgenroth's questions specifically on when she wrote that information on the folder and why she wrote it. That's why, because she indicated in her answer to him, she could not recall when she wrote it on the folder. So have you had the opportunity to review that?
Hold on a second, we need a ruling on this. Now he's kind of morphing into a different purpose than refreshing her recollection. And so I'm getting different answers here to the objections as we go along.
I think he's challenging the consistency of her testimony, and I want to make sure that she has an opportunity to clarify it and refreshing her memory of what she said earlier is appropriate, so I'm allowing her answer.
Ms. Russell, have you had the opportunity to review what you said in your transcript last week?
Yes.
With regard to why you wrote those notes on the folder?
Yes.
Why did you write the notes on the outside of the May 14 folder?
As I indicated, I assume it was because I would raise it in the conversation with the president.
President Simon?
Yes.
And that would obviously be before the meeting then with President Simon, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So if that was indeed your reason for putting it on the folder, then it certainly wasn't that you wrote it back on there in 2018 as you were asked by Mr. Morgenroth, correct?
Yes.
But so that we can narrow the time frame, it certainly wasn't before May 16th of 2014 because you didn't know about Larry Nassar before then, is that right? Or the night of May 15th, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you look like you're hesitating. Either the night of May 15th or May 16th is when you talked to Christine Moore, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you couldn't have known it before then about Larry Nassar and sexual assault, did you?
No.
Okay, so if it's before the meeting on the 19th, but after the conversation with Christine Moore on the, at least on the 15th, is that a fair time frame?
As I've indicated, I assume that that's why I wrote it there, so it would had to have been within that time frame, but I cannot tell you with any certainty when I wrote it. I said at different points, I assume that's why I wrote it there, so.
So you've been asked, obviously, a number of questions about what you recall discussing with President Simon at that meeting. And obviously, we've been asked that question a number of times, right? Is it your testimony that you just don't recall what was spoken between you and President Simon about Larry Nassar at that meeting?
Yes.
Or are you saying you did not talk to her about it?
I'm saying I can't recall.
Okay. And as I understood your testimony, though, and the fact that COM is on your agenda, you did talk about the COM incident, though, didn't you?
I can't recall.
Okay. If President Simon had notes about that, do you have any reason to doubt that those would have come from your meeting with her on the COM incident?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for lack of foundation and speculation. She can't possibly know what Dr. Simon wrote on her agenda, what her notes are, or what they mean.
Sounds speculative.
Let me see if I can fill it in a little bit. I'll rephrase that question. Was anybody else present during your one-on-one on May 19th of 2014?
To the best of my no.
Okay. And is that typical when you have a one-on-one? I take it there's not a secretary. You didn't take your administrative assistant. President Simon may not have had hers. It would literally be a one-on-one, just you and her?
Yes.
Okay. And so, as far as you knew, Christine Moore knew about what happened on May 15th or 16th, shared that with you. You shared it with President Simon and Dean Strampel.
No, objection.
Is that your recollection?
Hold on a second.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. Shared by, you sent an email.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. The record is crystal clear. The email that Ms. Russell sent to President Simon literally is 9 words and says we have an incident involving a sports medicine doc. That is much different than what Christine Moore wrote to Ms. Russell in her email. So for Mr. Teeter to say Christine Moore told you about this incident in this email and then you told President Simon is completely misleading and taking it out of context.
I know that. I'm sitting here for many hours very clearly, so it's not misleading me at all.
Okay.
If there were a jury just starting to listen to the case, they might be misled. I'm not misled. I know there was a more substantial conversation with Christine Moore and a limited email to Dr. Simon from what I've heard so far.
And so when we hit May 16th, okay, this is after you talked to Christine Moore, and I want to reference after she sent you the more detailed email and you made contact with Dean Strample, and you earlier notified President Simon. At that point, based on your knowledge, does anybody else know about this complaint other than you, Christine Moore, obviously Amanda Tomashow, and then President Simon in that earlier email, and Dean Strample?
It's possible that the police would have known. I don't know.
You don't know for sure when they were contacted?
No.
Okay, other than that report, anybody else? Did you discuss it with anybody else?
No.
Did you notify anybody else other than President Simon and Dean Strample?
The only conversation that might have been had, again, was with Christine Moore at that time, but I have no recollection of talking to anyone between the 16th and the 19th.
Okay. And to your knowledge, do you know if President Simon talked to anybody else but you, or received any communication about this complaint other than what you sent her?
I have the complaint, the email that was sent to her from me. I have no knowledge of anyone else having discussion with her, whether in general or his name. So that's my answer to your question.
One moment. Ms. Russell, I'm going to show you what's been admitted as Defense Exhibit E. Referring to page 55, which is at the end of the interview, if you start at line 5, Detective Arndt asked you a question. Can you read through that and read your answers?
Hold on a second, Your Honor. This is totally improper. I don't know why he is offering this. Is it to impeach the witness? Is it to refresh her recollection? But there's been no foundation or predicate laid for showing this transcript to Ms. Russell and having her read selected portions.
Your Honor, I don't need a foundation. It's admitted as an exhibit, and the defense has already covered. This was the interview that was recorded from her statement. So first we're going to see if it refreshes her recollection, and if not, then I'm going to use it to impeach her.
Okay, so this is to refresh recollection.
But she hasn't testified. She lacks memory on any issue. There's no question pending where she said, I don't remember. So what's the question we're trying to refresh her recollection on?
Do you remember exactly what was said during this interview?
No.
Okay, you can refresh your recollection. What line did you say, Mr. Teeter?
Starts at line 5 and goes down to line 20.
Okay.
Okay, have you had the opportunity to review that, Ms. Russell?
Yes.
And do you recall that you were under oath during that interview?
Yes.
Okay. And does that refresh your recollection to what you told Detective Arndt on July of 2018 at that investigative interview?
It's talking,
My question was, wait a minute, let's just don't,
yeah.
does it refresh your recollection as to what you told Detective Arndt on that day?
Yes.
Okay. And was that testimony true during that investigative interview?
Yes.
You were asked about whether or not you discussed this matter, the Nassar investigation, with President Simon. Is that the nature of that question?
And I believe I said it's possible, but he asked me also, as with other items that you did. And I said, items, yeah, it's possible, but I can't say with, and then he said, right, I understand. Is that still true, though? I said, that's still true.
Ms. Russell, you had testified earlier about getting the phone call from Christine Moore while you were at a track meet in Kalamazoo for your daughter. Do you recall that testimony?
I believe I said that it's possible. I believe that's where I got the calls, yes.
Looking at your, and I believe you testified you were carrying this cell phone, the ones we have the records for, admitted as Exhibit 42, when you took that trip to Kalamazoo. Is that right?
Yes.
The phone call at 9:17 on the night of May 15th for 14 minutes.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Teeter.
strike that. Actually, at 8:09, you have an incoming call from Lansing. Do you see that?
PM or PM?
I'm sorry, PM. On the night of May 15th.
Yes.
And you have a phone call that you received from a Lansing number, 517-719-6395, for 16 minutes. Do you know whose number that is?
No.
We've already covered this, Your Honor.
Yeah, we did.
My question is, when we go to May 16th in the morning, if we track your cell phone location, you're in East Lansing making outgoing call at 8:43 in the morning. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it goes East Lansing, Charlotte, Battle Creek, then in Kalamazoo, up till 11:12 in the morning on May 16th. Do you see that?
I'm in Kalamazoo until 7:45 p.m.
I'm sorry, you went Kalamazoo, then Portage, then back to Kalamazoo. Right, you're correct. Till when? 7:45 in the p.m.?
Yes.
So during that period of time is the track meet, is that right?
I can't tell you what time the track meet began, but that's when I was beginning to have calls to my cell phone.
Well, and also from your cell phone, right? Because origination is
Sure.
East Lansing, then it goes Charlotte, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, and Kalamazoo the rest of the day.
Yes.
Okay. So any calls to or from you during that time period would have had to been made on this cell phone, right?
I believe so.
Because that's the only one you carry?
Unless, yeah, I believe so.
The May 15th call at 9:17, that 517-230-3331, that was an incoming call for 14 minutes on your cell phone. Do you know whose number 517-230-3331 is?
No,
Okay. Do you know whether or not that was Christine Moore's?
I don't know.
Okay. You were asked about whether or not you ever looked at a final copy of the report involving the investigation of Larry Nassar. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
And as I understood your responsibility under the sexual assault policy adopted in 2011 by Michigan State, you were to supervise all investigations of Title IX complaints, weren't you?
Provide oversight, yes.
And yet, the one that involved Dr. Larry Nassar, a doctor at the college, and a sexual assault on a patient on the college, you never went back and took a look at the report?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. He can criticize Ms. Russell all he wants, but this has absolutely nothing to do with these charges. And so my objection is this is completely, entirely irrelevant to these charges.
It does sound like it's not relevant to connection with Dr. Steiner.
Well, except, Your Honor, it does go to how she handled the complaint and therefore any potential criminal or civil liability she may have had, up to and including the time she testifies today.
No.
So it does go to the issue of whether or not there was bias or prejudice based on how she responded as it related to the 2011 policy that mandates her supervision of these investigations.
Your Honor, we're not here to talk about Ms. Russell's civil or criminal liability. That's preposterous.
Well, I think he's challenging her credibility, but I think that's a stretch on sustaining the objection.
Okay. Once you returned from the country, did you ever check back with Christine Moore to see how Amanda Tomacheau was doing?
Objection, Your Honor, completely irrelevant.
Sustained.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you very much. You don't have any more questions, do you?
I do, Your Honor. I need to follow up on a few things.
I've heard everything many times, but you want to follow up on.
I've got about 5 or 6 that I will do very quickly, Your Honor.
Okay. Hopefully in 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay, Your Honor. You were asked some questions about the phone records, and I'm going to work in reverse order here. Do you recall that, Ms. Russell?
Yes.
And as you testified last week, it's possible you had this phone call with Christine Moore where she advised you about an incident involving a sports medicine doctor on the evening of May 15th. Isn't that true?
Yes.
You were also asked about what you testified to in your July 26th transcript at page 55. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Isn't it true, in order to be fair to you, that right above the portion of the transcript that Mr. Teeter had you read on page 54, you clearly and unambiguously said you don't have any independent recollection of talking to Luanna Simon about any of the things on your agenda or your folder. Isn't that true?
Yes.
You were also asked by Mr. Teeter why you put these notes on the folder, and he replowed that ground again. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Regardless of why you put the notes on the folder, your typed agenda says COM incident. Your typed agenda says nothing about Nassar, correct?
Yes.
Your handwritten notes that you made say nothing about Nassar, correct?
Yes.
And even if you did discuss item 6, which I understand you don't recall ever doing, it is possible you talked about it in terms of an incident involving a sports medicine doctor in COM, true?
Yes.
And so you don't recall ever mentioning the name Larry Nassar in 2014 to President Simon, true?
Objection, I have to answer.
Yes, about 100 times, but you went through that again. So I'll move on as soon as I get the answer. Yep. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. You were also asked questions about why you didn't tell the Michigan State Police during your interview in May about your folder or about the email you received from Christine Moore. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You understood that you were at those interviews in order to answer questions that the Michigan State Police and the Attorney General had for you, correct?
Yes.
Did you respond to all of their questions?
Yes.
Did you do so truthfully?
Yes.
They had a chance to ask you whatever follow-up questions they wanted to. Is that correct?
Yes.
You never refused to answer any questions, correct?
Yes.
And on May 25th, they didn't ask you any questions about your folder or any emails between you and Christine Moore. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you were also asked questions about why you would get this call on your cell phone on May 19th at 9:57 a.m. from your office for 1 minute. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You could have been coming back to your office from a meeting that you had at that time, and as you said, your office could have called to remind you about your meeting. That's what you told us, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Silver's created version of what could have been happening. That is not based on any testimony from this witness. So, again, it's without foundation. It calls for speculation.
Actually, the witness just said she did say that.
Well, Your Honor, I was objecting while the witness was answering. We moved to strike the answer. The question was posed by Mr. Silver of some hypothetical about where she was at and what she was doing. I haven't heard this witness indicate that she recalls where she was at and what she was doing.
Isn't that the Olds Hall?
Yes, exactly, Your Honor.
She thought probably her assistant called her to remind her
Right.
to be available for the 10:15 meeting with Dr. Simon.
Precisely. So,
So that it's been asked and answered, John?
yes,
Well,
I'll agree to
I didn't
that.
remember it, so I'm going to allow it again.
Okay. So, it is possible that when you had your discussion with President Simon on May 19th, you could have called Marty Howe from your office for that discussion, just as your agenda indicates. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then Marty Howe would have patched Dr. Simon in on the call, correct?
I'm assuming that's what it meant because of what's on the agenda.
Exactly. Okay, no further questions, Your Honor. I think I did my 5 or 6 minute.
You did.
Okay, good.
You did. Very good. I think we're done here. Thank you for your testimony. You are excused.
Your Honor, we're not going to release her from subpoena. If there is a need to recall her, we'd like to accept her under subpoena.
Please consider yourself still under subpoena. We won't have to call you again. We appreciate your cooperation.
Your Honor, because she remains under subpoena, we'd ask the court to repeat the instruction that she not discuss her testimony because she returns to court.
Continue not to discuss your testimony with anyone other than your attorney until this case is over. Now, who is your next witness?
June, you are?
Is that relatively quick?
Not 10 minutes, Your Honor.
Well, why don't we get started? The name again is what?
June, U-I, Y-O-U-A-T-T.
Right up to your case. Raise your right hand. You promise to tell the truth and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
Please be seated. State your name and spell your last name.
It's June Hewitt, Y-O-U-A-T-T.
Thank you. Ms. Hewitt, where are you employed?
Michigan State University.
In what capacity?
I serve as the provost.
And how long have you served in that capacity?
Almost 5 years.
What are your responsibilities?
I'm responsible for the academic activities of the institution, curriculum, oversight of the college's academic units.
Prior to taking over the position as provost, where were you employed?
Michigan State.
In what capacity?
I was the senior associate provost.
I'm sorry?
The senior associate provost?
So still in a provost's office?
Yes.
And when did you hire into that office?
In the office in 2002.
And when did you become a senior associate provost?
In 2006.
Are your job responsibilities now the same as they were in 2014?
Yes.
And what were your job responsibilities during that year?
In 2014, I was responsible for oversight of colleges and academic programs.
And as provost, who is your direct supervisor in 2014?
The university president, Dr. Simon.
The person you know is President Simon. Do you see her present in court today?
Yes.
Could you point her out and describe for the record an article of clothing that she's wearing?
A black jacket.
May the record reflect she's identified the defendant.
Just so that's up.
How long was she your direct supervisor?
My direct supervisor for 5 years. 4 years.
So 2014 to 2018?
Correct.
And that was when President Simon resigned?
Correct.
Did you have standing one-on-one meetings with President Simon?
I did.
How often?
It varied, at least every 2 weeks.
What was the purpose of those meetings?
Often to catch up on major issues, to seek advice or guidance, and also to get assignments.
Get assignments from President Simon?
Yes.
What kind of things did President Simon request to be informed of?
I'm not sure I recall her ever requesting to be informed of. I assumed, I think, major decisions on which I needed guidance or direction or advice or input.
Did you ever deal with issues that might put the university at risk, either public perception or something that would have the ability to make the college look bad?
I'm sure we did, because there were a variety of things that would have put, I don't know what the university, but students or others at risk. So yes, we talked about things that would have had an impact on students, faculty, the university.
During your regular meetings, did you come to the meetings with agenda items or a written agenda?
I came with a list, yes.
And those were issues in your area that you had to discuss with President Simon?
Yes, I usually kept a list of items over the week or 2 weeks since I had seen her that I wanted to remember in the time that I had with her.
And when you met, did she have a list of items to discuss with you?
She did.
Who had a longer list?
I think she had a longer list.
Okay. Was there any ranking in terms of priority of what things that got talked about in these meetings versus, some other way to communicate or resolve them?
I'm not sure I can answer that on her list because we didn't share lists. She had a list in a folder, I had a list in a folder, and we didn't mutually exchange those lists.
So I take it you'd come to the meeting with the things you thought were important, and she may come to the meeting with different things?
I don't know the answer to that. I think probably some of the things were the same, but she often asked me to begin so that I had my needs addressed first.
Did you participate in larger meetings with President Simon?
Yes.
Other than your one-on-one meetings, what other meetings did you attend with President Simon during 2014?
Variety. We met, there was a regular meeting of budget operations that met weekly or every other week, a meeting of all vice presidents and some additional academic leaders in a core meeting. I'm sure there were a number of other not informal meetings, but scheduled as needed, where there were multiple people.
They used the term core meetings. Is that also what's referred to as the cabinet?
Yes.
And who was on the cabinet?
It included all of the vice presidents. It included the director of the I3 office, Intercultural Initiative Office. Sometimes included the police chief, the athletic director sometimes.
Did those meetings have an agenda?
They did.
And who set that agenda?
It was sometimes set, I think it was actually set by a vice president and secretary to the board who accumulated items, but individuals who were attending that meeting were also asked if they had items that they wanted to share in those meetings.
Then, were there also executive meetings?
There were smaller meetings, yes, of a smaller number of vice presidents.
How often were those?
Sometimes weekly, but again, scheduling varied depending on demands of activities.
Were you involved in those meetings?
I was.
And was President Simon in those meetings?
She was.
Do you recall in 2011 that MSU received a letter from the Office of Civil Rights referred to as the Dear Colleague letter?
I do.
When did you become aware of that letter being sent to the college?
I can't be sure.
Do you know
I
whether or
don't.
not it was in 2011?
I don't.
In your area of responsibility, did you have any specific responsibility to respond to the recommendations in that Dear Colleague letter or to make changes based on that letter?
Not directly, no. Although I participated in training as a result of changes that were made.
And you went to training or you helped train?
No, I was a participant in training.
And was that training under for sexual assault and sexual harassment?
Yes.
Was there a time that you became aware of Title IX complaints that had been filed with the Office of Civil Rights against Michigan State?
Yes.
Do you recall when you became aware of that?
I don't. Probably 11 or 12, but I can't identify a particular time.
How did you become aware of those complaints?
I don't have a strong memory of the timeline, but I know I was aware when we had reviewers who came to campus and interviewed individuals around those complaints.
Was that when the Office of Civil Rights made a campus visit then?
Yes.
And was that campus visit or those complaints discussed at the monthly cabinet meeting?
I don't recall specifically. I would guess that they were, yes.
Do you know whether or not that was also an item of discussion in your executive meeting, the smaller meeting?
Again, I don't recall specifically, but I would assume yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I appreciate this witness assuming, but I'm going to object based on lack of personal knowledge and move that the last two answers be struck if they're simply assumptions and not based on personal knowledge.
Well, you can cross-examine on that. So I'm not going to strike it, but I'm sure you'll pin down just what she means by using one of your elders.
Just to follow up on those, why is it that you assume they were covered at the cabinet meetings and at the executive meetings?
I recall during that time, I have no specific recollection of a conversation, but I remember that we took the visit very seriously, and I do not recall the specific meeting in which this was discussed, but people who were being interviewed were urged to respond seriously, candidly, and to be cooperative during that time.
Urged by whom?
Probably President Simon, and perhaps, again, I don't recall. I just recall in that time this sense of the importance of the visit.
And based on the either the cabinet meetings or the executive meetings, was, to the best that you're able to recall, was President Simon aware of that OCR visit?
Yes.
Okay. And was she involved in at least communicating about the level of cooperation that she expected from people?
I am sure she was.
And Do you know whether or not there was a discussion that you were part of on why that visit was a big deal, why to take it seriously?
Again, I can't point to a specific meeting or a specific time, but as part of all of our roles, we understood the role of the Office of Civil Rights. We understood our obligations as a higher ed institution, and so certainly if there were going to be reviewers on campus and asking questions, that was a serious matter.
Are there potential consequences if the university was found to have violated Title IX according to the Office of Civil Rights?
I was not aware of specific consequences. I think the general understanding was that as a outcome of the review that there were likely to be recommended changes to improve processes.
Are you familiar with Paulette Granberry Russell?
I am.
And how did you know her?
I have worked with her or alongside her for a number of years.
When you say alongside her, where was that at?
Her office is literally several doors down from my office.
And I take it, as I understand the layout, that's a few doors down from President Simon's office as well?
That's correct.
Did you ever discuss the OCR investigation with Paulette Granberry Russell?
I can't recall any specific conversation.
Was there a time in 2014 that you became aware of a pending matter involving Larry Nassar?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that?
I had a meeting with then Dean William Strample. It was an update meeting on a number of things, and sometime during that meeting, he mentioned having a physician who was being reviewed and indicated that his name was Dr. Nassar.
And why would he bring that to you? What was your responsibility with regard to faculty members?
Objection. Our calls for speculation.
Did you say, use the word rebuke to review?
Review.
Review, okay. And so do you know the answer to the question, or is it, do you not know?
I believe I know, yes. He was indicating to me a whole set of things that were happening in the college, and I think during that meeting, he probably covered 15 events or activities that were going on in the college, and he mentioned this as one of that list.
And at that time in 2014, what was Dean Strample's responsibility? What was his position?
He was dean of the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Larry Nassar was a fixed-term faculty member in that college.
And what are your responsibilities with regard to the deans and to fixed-term faculty members?
I'm responsible for the deans.
What was your understanding of what Larry Nassar was being reviewed for?
I do not have a specific recollection of anything specific that he told me, other than as I looked back over an old agenda, that the physician was being reviewed.
And why would you need to be informed if a physician was being reviewed?
I don't believe that he was I don't believe he called it to my attention specifically, other than it was one of a number of things happening in his college and major events with faculty, positive or negative, he was sharing with me.
And did you follow up on that after you were told he was under review?
I did not.
Why not?
I can only speculate about that at this point. I can't recall. But I can tell you that just a few months before, we had another physician who was being reviewed by the Quality and Peer Review Committee. They found instances of poor outcomes, and subsequently we went through a due process procedure and his privileges were removed. So having just gone through that successfully, unfortunately, any news about another physician being reviewed, I believe I would have assumed at the time would have taken the same process. So I expected that if there were negative findings from the quality and peer review teams within the health team, that would be reported to me as it had been previously.
And during that review, was it your understanding that Larry Nasser was still seeing patients?
I would have assumed he was not seeing patients during that time.
Why would you assume that?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. We're talking about her assumptions. The rules of evidence say if she has personal knowledge, that's fine, but she can only testify about personal knowledge and not assumptions. So I object based on lack of personal knowledge.
I can rephrase that, Your Honor.
About how much longer do you have on the direct?
Probably 15 minutes.
You want to take a break?
Yeah, we can break now if you want. That's fine.
Let's come back at 1:30.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And please don't talk about the case to anybody, okay? Thank you. Other than an attorney if you have one.